got so motherfucking design on right now. Bring it down, make it clap. I got 3 old thoughts on the block.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be tackling something I think a lot of you are going to find really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Psychology. It's something that touches every single aspect of our lives.
Right. It's like the invisible force that shapes how we think, how we feel, how we act.
Totally. And you've given me this awesome podcast episode to work with.
That's a good one.
So let's jump right in. What exactly is psychology?
Well, in the simplest terms, it's the scientific study of the mind and behavior.
Okay, so it's not just about what's going on in our heads. It's about how those thoughts and feelings translate into action.
Exactly. And it's about understanding the complex interplay between our inner world and the outside world.
So nature versus nurture, all that good stuff.
All of it. And you know what's really cool? Psychology wasn't always a formal science.
Really?
Yeah, it actually started way back with ancient philosophers, like Aristotle. He was pondering the human soul centuries ago.
Wow, so he was like a proto-psychologist. I love that proto-psychologist.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was definitely asking some of the same fundamental questions that psychologists are still grappling with today.
That's amazing. So when did psychology actually become like a legit science?
Well, it wasn't until the late 1800s that things really started to shift.
Okay, what happened?
Well, this guy named Wilhelm Wundt, he's often called the father of psychology.
Okay, I've heard that name before.
Yeah. Well, he established the first experimental psychology lab in 1879.
So that was like a major turning point.
It was. It marked the official birth of psychology as a science.
Before that, it was all just speculation and philosophical debates.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But Wundt wanted to study the mind in a systematic and objective way.
So he was all about bringing the scientific method to the study of the mind.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have Sigmund Freud coming onto the scene in the early 1900s.
Oh, yeah. Freud. The guy with all the theories about the unconscious mind.
That's the one. And even though his ideas were pretty controversial at the time, they had a huge impact on the field of psychology.
So what was so revolutionary about Freud's ideas?
Well, before Freud, most psychologists focused on conscious thoughts and experiences.
Right. The stuff we're aware of.
Exactly. But Freud was like, hey, there's a whole lot going on beneath the surface.
Like a hidden world of desires and motivations.
Exactly. He believed that our unconscious mind, the part we're not aware of, plays a powerful role in shaping our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So even if we don't realize it, our past experiences and hidden desires are influencing our present actions.
According to Freud, yes. Now, not everyone agrees with all of Freud's theories.
I can imagine.
Yeah, some of his ideas have been challenged and modified over the years.
But he definitely got people thinking about the unconscious mind.
Oh, absolutely. He opened up a whole new way of understanding human behavior.
Okay, so we've got Wundt and Freud. They're
Right.
like the founding fathers of psychology.
Two of the big names, for sure. But there were others who made important contributions, too.
Like who?
Well, there was Jan Pavlov. He was a Russian physiologist who did those famous experiments with dogs and bells.
Oh, yeah, Pavlov's dogs. I remember learning about that in school.
Yeah, well, his work helped us understand how we learn through association.
Conditioning, right.
Exactly. He showed that we can learn to associate a neutral stimulus, like a bell, with a meaningful stimulus, like food, and that this association can trigger an automatic response.
So that's why my dog goes crazy every time she hears the treat jar rattle.
Probably Pavlov's work had a major influence on the development of behaviorism.
Behaviorism? Isn't that all about how our environment shapes our behavior?
That's a big part of it. Behaviorists believe that psychology should focus on observable behavior, not on subjective mental states.
So instead of trying to figure out what's going on inside someone's head, they focused on studying how people act and react to different stimuli.
Exactly. They believe that all behavior is learned through interactions with the environment.
So that means we're not born with certain personality traits or predispositions.
According to behaviorists, no. They believe that we're essentially blank slates at birth.
Interesting. So we're shaped by our experiences.
That's the idea. Now, of course, not everyone agrees with that.
Right. There's probably a whole nature versus nurture debate going on there.
There definitely is, and it's a complex issue. But behaviorism had a huge impact on how we understand learning and behavior modification.
So like when parents use rewards and punishments to teach their kids, right?
Exactly.
Huh.
Or when therapists use techniques like exposure therapy to help people overcome phobias.
Wow. So psychology's come a long way since those early days of Wundt and Freud.
It really has, and it's still evolving and expanding.
So what are some of the core concepts that define psychology today?
Well, at its heart, psychology is about understanding the building blocks of the human experience. Thoughts, behaviors, emotions.
Okay, those seem pretty fundamental.
We are, and they're all interconnected.
So it's not just about studying these things in isolation. It's about understanding how they interact and influence each other.
Exactly. For example, our thoughts can influence our emotions, and our emotions can influence our behaviors.
Right. So if I'm constantly thinking negative thoughts, I'm more likely to feel anxious or depressed. And that can lead to withdrawing from social situations or engaging in unhealthy coping mechanisms.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
And the reverse is also true. If we change our behaviors, we can actually change our thoughts and emotions.
Really?
Yeah. There's a growing body of research showing that even simple things like smiling more or exercising regularly can have a positive impact on our mental health.
So it's like a feedback loop. Our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are constantly influencing each other.
Exactly. And understanding this interplay is key to understanding ourselves and others.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the podcast episode you gave me also talked about memory. How does that fit into the bigger picture of psychology?
Well, memory is a pretty big deal in psychology.
Yeah, I mean, it shapes who we are. It's how
Yeah.
we learn and grow. It's how we connect with others.
Exactly. And it's a lot more complex than we often realize.
In what way?
Well, for one thing, our memories aren't always accurate.
Wait, what? You mean I can't trust my own memories?
Not always. Our memories can be influenced by a whole range of factors. Our emotions, our beliefs, the way we frame events, even other people's accounts.
So it's like our memories are constantly being rewritten and reshaped.
In a way, yes.
Eh.
And this can have a big impact on how we see ourselves and the world around us.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing. So what else do we need to know about memory?
Well, there are different types of memory. Short-term memory, long-term memory, working memory.
Right, I've heard of those.
And each type plays a different role in how we process and store information.
So short-term memory is like the information we're holding in our minds right now, like a phone number we just heard.
Exactly. And long-term memory is the vast storehouse of information we've accumulated over time.
Like our childhood memories or the lyrics to our favorite song.
Exactly. And working memory is the type of memory we use to actively process information, like when we're trying to solve a problem or follow a set of instructions.
So it's like our mental workspace.
Exactly. And all of these different types of memory work together to shape our thoughts, behaviors, and experiences.
Okay, this is all starting to come together. We've got thoughts, behaviors, emotions, memory. They're all interconnected, and they all play a role in shaping who we are.
That's a great summary. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
There's so much more to learn about psychology.
There is. It's a vast and fascinating field.
So where do we go from here? How do we delve deeper into this world of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions?
Well, the good news is psychology is branched out into a whole bunch of different areas, each with its own unique focus and perspective.
Okay, so it's like a giant tree with all these different branches.
Exactly. And each branch offers a different set of tools for understanding the human mind.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these different branches of psychology.
All right, let's start with cognitive psychology.
Cognitive psychology, what's that all about?
Well, it's all about how we think, how we process information, solve problems, make decisions.
So it's like understanding the software that runs our mental computer.
Exactly. Cognitive psychologists are interested in things like attention perception, memory language, and reasoning.
So if I'm struggling to make a decision or remember something, cognitive psychology can help me understand why.
It can. It can give you insights into your thought patterns, your biases, and your mental strengths and weaknesses.
That's cool. What about behavioral psychology? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, well, behavioral psychology focuses on observable behavior and how it's shaped by learning and environmental factors.
So it's all about how we respond to stimuli and how those responses are reinforced or extinguished over time.
Exactly. And this approach has led to some really effective therapies for treating things like phobias, anxiety disorders, and even addiction.
So like exposure therapy, where you gradually expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of.
That's one example.
Yeah.
And there's also operant conditioning, which uses rewards and punishments to shape behavior.
Interesting. So cognitive psychology is about understanding the inner workings of the mind, and behavioral psychology is about understanding how our environment shapes our actions.
That's a good way to put it. And then there's developmental psychology.
Developmental psychology, isn't that about how kids grow and develop?
It is, but it's more than that. It's about understanding how we change and evolve across the entire lifespan.
So from infancy to old age.
Exactly. Developmental psychologists are interested in things like cognitive development, social development, emotional development, and moral development.
So they're trying to figure out how our minds and personalities change as we age.
That's right. And their research has led to some really important insights into things like attachment parenting styles and the challenges of aging.
Fascinating. Okay, what about social psychology? Where does that fit in?
Well, social psychology is all about how we're influenced by others.
So like peer pressure and conformity.
Those are definitely part of it. But social psychology also looks at things like attraction, prejudice, group dynamics, and leadership.
So it's about understanding how we behave in social situations.
Exactly. And it can help us understand things like why we fall in love, why we discriminate against certain groups, and why we sometimes make irrational decisions when we're in a group.
That's really interesting. Okay, we've covered cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, developmental psychology, and social psychology. What else is there?
Well, there's also clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology, that's the one that deals with mental health disorders, right?
Exactly. Clinical psychologists are trained to assess, diagnose, and treat a wide range of mental health conditions.
Like depression, anxiety, PTSD.
All of those and more. They use a variety of techniques, including psychotherapy medication and lifestyle changes to help people improve their mental health and well-being.
So it's like they're the mental health specialists of the psychology world.
That's a good way to think about it.
Wow. So there are so many different ways to approach the study of the mind and behavior.
There are. And each branch of psychology offers its own unique insights and perspectives.
It's amazing how much this field has grown and evolved.
It really is. And it's still evolving.
So we've got these different branches of psychology, but what about the physical organ that makes all this thinking and feeling possible? The brain.
Ah, yes. The brain, the command center of it all.
Exactly. What can you tell me about the brain and its role in psychology?
Well, the brain is an incredibly complex organ. It's made up of billions of neurons, which are nerve cells that communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals.
Okay. And how does all that neural activity translate into thoughts, emotions, and behaviors?
Well, different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. For example, we have the amygdala, which is often called the fear center of the brain.
So if I see a spider and freak out, that's my amygdala firing.
That's a good example. The amygdala is involved in processing emotions, especially fear and aggression.
Okay. What about the hippocampus? I've heard that's important for memory.
It is. The hippocampus is essential for forming new memories.
So if I damage my hippocampus, I won't be able to remember new information.
That's right. And there's the prefrontal cortex, which is often called the CEO of the brain.
Why is that?
Well, it's the part of the brain that's responsible for planning decision-making, impulse control, all those higher-level cognitive functions that make us human.
So it's like the executive control center of our brain.
Exactly. And then there are all the different neurotransmitters. Those are the chemical messengers that allow neurons to communicate with each other.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those, like dopamine and serotonin.
Those are two of the big ones. Dopamine is involved in reward and pleasure, while serotonin is involved in mood and emotional stability.
So if I'm feeling happy and motivated, that's because my brain is releasing dopamine and serotonin.
That's a simplified way to put it. But yes, the balance of these neurotransmitters plays a big role in our mental health.
Wow. So the brain is like a vast interconnected network of neurons, neurotransmitters, and specialized regions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's constantly working to process information, regulate our emotions, and generate our behaviors.
This is incredible. I'm starting to see how all these different pieces of the puzzle fit together. The different branches of psychology, the brain, the neurotransmitters, the thoughts, behaviors, and emotions.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
The more we learn about these connections, the more we understand about what makes us human.
This is so fascinating, but I gotta ask, why do we sometimes act in ways that seem totally illogical or out of character?
That's a great question. And it leads us to some of the quirks of the human mind, the fascinating little glitches that make us who we are.
Quirks and glitches. I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, we're going to dive into that next time.
Yeah.
We're going to explore those quirks, those biases, those irrational impulses that make us so wonderfully complex.
Sounds good. I can't wait to unpack those glitches. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after the break. See you then. Welcome back. All right. So we were just talking about those quirks of the human mind, those fascinating little glitches that sometimes make us act in ways that seem totally irrational.
Yeah, those glitches. I'm ready to explore those.
Yeah.
The podcast episode you gave me actually mentioned something called cognitive biases. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. Cognitive biases are essentially mental shortcuts. Our brains take them to simplify decision-making.
Okay, so it's like our brains are trying to be efficient, but sometimes they take shortcuts that lead to errors in judgment. Exactly. And, these biases, They can be helpful in many situations, allowing us to make quick judgments without getting bogged down in too much information. But they can also lead us astray.
So how do these cognitive biases actually work? Like, what's going on in our brains?
Well, one of the most well-known biases is confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias, I've heard of that. What is it again?
It's the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if that information is flawed or inaccurate.
So it's
Yeah.
like we're only seeing what we want to see.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
We tend to filter out information that challenges our worldview, and this can have a real impact on our decision-making, especially when it comes to things like politics, relationships, or even just everyday choices.
So if I'm convinced that a certain political party is always right, I'm more likely to ignore evidence that contradicts my belief.
Exactly. Or if you believe that a certain type of person is untrustworthy,
Yeah.
you might be more likely to interpret their actions in a negative light, even if there's no real evidence to support your suspicion.
Wow. So confirmation bias can be pretty dangerous.
It can. It can lead us to make biased decisions, reinforce stereotypes, and even damage relationships.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling prey to confirmation bias?
Well, the first step is simply being aware that it exists. Once you understand how this bias works, you can start to identify it in your own thinking.
So like doing a mental checkup, asking myself, am I really being objective here, or am I just looking for evidence that supports what I already believe?
Exactly. And it's also helpful to actively seek out diverse perspectives. Talk to people who have different viewpoints. Read articles from sources you don't normally agree with.
So it's about exposing yourself to different ideas and challenging your own assumptions.
Exactly. It's about being open-minded and willing to consider evidence that might contradict your beliefs.
That makes sense. What other cognitive biases should we be aware of?
Well, there's the availability heuristic.
Availability heuristic. That's a mouthful. What is that?
It's the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled or that have received a lot of media attention.
So like if I just saw a news report about a plane crash, I might be more afraid of flying, even though statistically flying is still very safe.
Exactly. Or if you've recently heard about a few cases of identity theft, you might be more worried about it happening to you, even though the overall risk might be low.
So our brains are kind of lazy. They tend to rely on the information that's most readily available.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And this can lead to some irrational fears and anxieties.
Okay, so we've got confirmation bias and the availability heuristic.
Any others?
Oh, there are tons. There's the anchoring bias, the framing effect, the halo effect, the sunk cost fallacy.
Wow, that's a lot of biases.
It is. And they all influence our thinking and decision-making in different ways.
So it's like our brains are constantly playing tricks on us.
In a way, yes. But the good news is, once we're aware of these biases, we can start to mitigate their influence.
So it's all about being mindful and questioning our own assumptions.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that our brains are not always as rational and objective as we think they are. Okay, that's helpful. Now, the podcast episode also talked about something called social influence. How does that fit into the bigger picture of psychology?
Well, social influence is a powerful force. It's the idea that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by the people around us.
So like peer pressure and conformity.
Those are classic examples.
Yeah.
But social influence goes beyond that. It can affect everything from our fashion choices to our political beliefs.
So I'm more likely to like a certain band if my friends like them.
Possibly. Or you might be more likely to donate to a charity if you see your neighbors doing it.
So we're constantly being influenced by the people around us, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is why things like social media marketing and influencer culture are so effective.
Right. They're tapping into our innate desire to belong and conform.
Exactly. Now, there's a fascinating experiment that really highlights the power of social influence. It's called the Ash conformity experiment.
I've never heard of that. Tell me more.
All right. So in this experiment, a group of people are shown a series of lines, and they're asked to identify which line is the longest.
Okay. Sounds simple enough.
It is. But here's the catch. All but one of the participants are actually actors, and they're instructed to give the wrong answer.
So the one real participant is surrounded by people who are intentionally giving the wrong answer.
Exactly. And what the researchers found was that the real participant was surprisingly likely to conform to the group's wrong answer, even when it was clearly obvious that the answer was wrong.
Wow. So even when we know something is wrong, we might still go along with the group if everyone else is doing it.
Exactly. It's a powerful demonstration of the pressure to conform.
That's a bit scary, actually. It makes you wonder how much of our behavior is truly our own and how much is influenced by the people around us.
It's a great question, and it's one that psychologists are still exploring. But it's clear that social influence plays a significant role in shaping our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Okay, so we've got cognitive biases and social influence. They're both pretty powerful forces that can shape our actions. Is there anything we can do to resist these forces?
Well, it's not always easy, but the first step is awareness. Once you understand how these biases and influences work, you can start to recognize them in your own life.
So it's about being mindful and questioning your own assumptions.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to challenge the status quo, even when it feels uncomfortable.
That makes sense. Now, the podcast episode you gave me also touched on something called self-fulfilling prophecies. What are those?
Ah, yes. Self-fulfilling prophecies. These are beliefs or expectations that actually come true because we act in ways that make them come true.
Okay, that sounds kind of circular. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you believe that you're bad at public speaking.
Okay, I can relate to that.
Well, if you believe that you're bad at public speaking, you might be more likely to avoid public speaking situations. Or if you do have to speak in public, you might be so nervous and anxious that you actually do a poor job.
So my belief that I'm bad at public speaking actually makes me bad at public speaking.
Exactly. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, on the other hand, if you believe that you're a good public speaker, you're more likely to seek out opportunities to speak in public. And you might be more confident and relaxed when you do speak, which can actually lead to a better performance.
So our beliefs can actually shape our reality.
In a way, yes. And this applies to all sorts of things, our relationships, our careers, our health.
So if I believe I'm going to fail a test, I'm more likely to actually fail.
It's possible. Of course, it's not always that simple. But our beliefs can definitely influence our actions and outcomes.
So it's important to cultivate positive beliefs and expectations.
Absolutely. Because if we believe we can do something, we're much more likely to actually achieve it.
That's really empowering.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Cognitive biases, social influence, self-fulfilling prophecies. It's amazing how much our minds can influence our reality.
It really is. And we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore in the world of psychology.
Well, I'm definitely hooked. I'm ready to keep diving deeper into these fascinating ideas.
That's great to hear. And in our next segment, we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going to talk about how we can use psychology to improve our lives.
Okay, so from theory to practice, I like it. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. Okay, so we've explored those quirks, those biases, those irrational impulses, and it's amazing how much our minds can influence our reality.
It truly is.
Yeah.
But you know what I find really empowering about psychology?
What's that?
It gives us tools to work with those quirks and biases, to understand them and even overcome them.
Right, so it's not like we're just stuck with these glitches. We can actually do something about them.
Exactly. And that's where the practical side of psychology comes in. The
Okay.
podcast episode you shared actually had some great takeaways about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about those practical applications. How can we use psychology to actually improve our lives?
Well, one area where psychology can make a huge difference is in mental well-being.
Okay, that's something I think we all struggle with at times. So what are some psychological tools we can use to manage stress and boost our mood?
Well, one technique that's gained a lot of attention is mindfulness.
Mindfulness, I've heard of that. What is it exactly?
It's basically about paying attention to the present moment without judgment, noticing your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without getting carried away by them.
So it's like training your mind to be more present and less reactive.
Exactly.
Mm.
And there's a growing body of research showing that mindfulness can have a really positive impact on reducing stress, anxiety, and even depression.
Wow. So it's not just about feeling zen and relaxed. It's about actually changing the way our brains respond to stress.
Exactly. And the great thing about mindfulness is that you can practice it anytime, anywhere.
Right. Just taking a few deep breaths, focusing on the sensations of your body.
Exactly. Even a few minutes of mindfulness each day can make a big difference.
Okay, mindfulness is definitely going on my to-do list. What other practical tools does psychology offer for boosting mental well-being?
Well, another powerful tool is journaling.
Journaling. I used to keep a diary when I was a kid. But how can that help with mental health?
Well, it's not just about recording events. It's about processing your thoughts and emotions, getting them out of your head and onto paper.
So it's like having a conversation with yourself on paper.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And it can be surprisingly therapeutic. It can help you gain self-awareness, identify patterns in your thinking, and even challenge negative beliefs.
Okay, I'm seeing how that could be helpful. What about relationships? How can psychology help us build stronger connections with others?
Well, one of the most important skills in any relationship is empathy.
Empathy. That's about understanding and sharing the feelings of another person, right?
Exactly. It's about putting yourself in their shoes, seeing the world from their perspective.
That makes sense. But how do we actually become more empathetic?
Well, it starts with active listening, really paying attention to what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
So putting down your phone, making eye contact, really tuning in.
Exactly. And it's about asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard, and trying to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
So it's about going beyond just hearing words. It's about really understanding where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And empathy is a skill that you can develop with practice. It just takes time and effort.
Okay. Empathy is definitely something I want to work on. What about productivity? I'm always looking for ways to get more done. Does psychology have any tips for that?
It does. The podcast episode you shared actually mentioned a couple of really effective techniques.
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, one technique is called setting SMART goals.
SMART goals. I've heard of that. But what does it actually mean?
It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay. So it's not just about setting any old goal. It's about making sure your goals are well-defined and realistic.
Exactly. And by setting a time frame, you're creating a sense of urgency and accountability.
So it's like giving yourself a roadmap to success.
That's a good way to put it. And another technique that can boost productivity is the Pomodoro technique.
The Pomodoro technique, what's that all about?
It's a time management method that involves working in focused bursts of 25 minutes, followed by short breaks.
Oh, I've actually tried that one. And it's surprisingly effective. It's amazing how much you can get done when you eliminate distractions and really focus.
Exactly. And by building in those regular breaks, you're preventing burnout and maintaining your focus over the long haul.
Okay, so we've got mindfulness journaling, empathy, SMART goals, the Pomodoro technique. These are all practical tools we can use to improve our lives.
Exactly. And there are just a few examples. There are countless other ways to apply psychology to everyday life.
This is so inspiring. I feel like I've been given this incredible toolbox, and now it's up to me to use it.
That's the spirit. And the more you use these tools, the more skilled you'll become at navigating the complexities of your own mind and the minds of others.
This deep dive has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating world.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the human mind. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and are inspired to continue exploring the wonders of your own unique and amazing mind.
And remember, understanding our minds is the key to living a more fulfilling and meaningful life. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep unlocking the secrets of your own incredible mind.